Hi everyone, good day. So this recording will be a pre-recording for the activity for Module 8, which is how you're going to do in-betweening. So this is a pre-recorded recording due to the fact that the previous synchronous learning sessions recording didn't really work out well. So with this one, I will just go ahead with it. So I'm going to be using mostly digital. However, whatever I'll be doing right now, you can either use traditional or digital. So the one for the digital, I'll be using Krita, as well as a digital tablet that I have off camera. So with this one, I'll be starting by creating a new file. So I'll just be clicking that one right here. So for the width and height, you can have whatever width or height that you have. However, our minimum requirement is that it has to be landscape, and at the same time, it has to be a minimum of 500 pixels for the width. So a normal resolution screen might have 1280 by 720p. Some of you might want to do a 1920 by 1080p, which is for 1080p resolution. So the one that I have right now is 720p resolution. For this one, you don't really have to go really high in terms of its resolution. Around 1000 pixels is enough. If you are using your paper or traditional, you can just use 1/2 short bond paper. So with this one, the resolution, whichever you have, I do recommend, however, whichever, if you're going to scan it or if you're going to take a photo of your previous keyframes, it would be much better to match the resolution for that one. So we'll be creating that one now. So for this one, as you can see, we have the interface for Krita. So the main interface that we have is, first of all, you have the canvas right here. At the bottom, you have your timeline, you have your tool options at the upper right, and then for the lower right, you have the animation. Over the left right here, you have the tools that you need for drawing if you will be using digital. For those who will be using traditional, the only things that you actually need are the canvas, the timeline, as well as the animation right here. So for this one, to start off, we're going to have the keyframes that we created. So to do that, you can have import animation frames and then add the images that you need. So you need two. You need your A4 and you need your A10. So I'll be opening those ones and then I'll be clicking OK. So if you import animation frames, usually they would be arranged in this manner. So it would only be in one layer and then it would be in two separate frames. So for this one, as you can see, how its resize is quite odd. So with that one, we'll have to do a little bit of resizing. So I'll be using, um, so we'll be reusing this one, our measurements. So I'll be resizing this one, making sure that they are equal. So with this one thing that you might want to prevent is something like this, which is stretching the character. So for this one, make sure that it is aligned. So for me to be able to do that, it would be much better for me to go to the position. And then afterwards, maybe arrange this one right here. Make sure that the height is consistent. And then going a bit downwards, I'll be seeing there a percentage. And then based from that one, I can now check the proportions. Okay, so I'll be opening my onion skinning, making sure that they are visible. And if we're going to turn on the light box right here, you can see that there's not really a difference. This is to be expected. However, if you go to your A4, you might see like a little bit more compared to that of your A10. This is because this is a JPEG. So what that means is that this white color is not really transparent. It's another color. So with that one, it might be a bit difficult for you to counter check whenever you need to do flipping. So with this one, it's a necessity if you're going to use digital for you to trace it on another layer. For those who are using traditional, as long as you're using the same sizing, then you can just simply use the frames that you have for A4 or for A10. So for those who are going to do it digitally, since we did it traditionally, of course you will be having to scan it or take a photo of it, upload it, and then have it in this manner. So give me a while for me to be able to trace this. So what we're going to do right now is that we're going to trace it so that we would be able to see beyond it. Alright, so here we have our A10 and we have our A4. So I have right here, of course, you need to also copy the frame labels and as well as the time chart for A4. So with that one, you can already see a little bit of movement. So let's try it. Let's try it out a little bit. And there you go. You can see a little bit of movement right now. Okay. So with this one, we can probably delete our layer 2 because that's not necessarily needed right now. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do with the in-betweening process. So for the in-betweening, we always start at the middlemost. So we start with A5, and then after that are A6, A7, A8, and then A9. So to create another frame in Krita, you will be clicking on either frames really, and then keyframes. If you have chosen the second frame, you will be using insert keyframe left. If you have chosen the first one, you will be using insert keyframe right. So I have a blank frame right here. Next thing is that I will be opening the Lightbox so that I can see the difference between my A4 and my A10. So I'll be labeling this one as my A5. This is a breakdown frame. And here you have your two characters, your two frames. So as you can see, we have quite a few things that we have to think about or to look into. So we have, of course, the movement of the general movement. What are the moving and the non-moving parts? What are the things that we need to take into consideration whenever we're animating? So the first thing that we have to notice is what are the moving and the non-moving objects. So in this case, our moving objects is basically everything else up until your torso. So your head is of course going to move, your neck is going to move, this lapel thing here is going to move, your right arm is going to move. We also have here the movement of the left arm. So the movement of the left arm is you have this one right here, which is supposedly a joint. So how it's going to move is that it's not really going to move as if it's slowly unraveling, because that would kind of give off the idea that your character has a broken joint. So with this one, we'll have to take into consideration the joint right here whenever we're going to bend it later on. The non-moving one, however, it probably starts around the bottom of this lapel right here and then the very bottom part. So whenever we're animating, we can just simply ignore this one. So if ever we're going to animate later on, we can simply ignore or not animate this one anymore because it's kind of understood that we will be tracing that one. However, please do not forget to trace this one as well. Next one is we're going to create our path of action. So for our path of action, I'll be creating a new blank keyframe right here in the bottom layer. And for this one, we're going to determine what is the movement of the movement objects. Where are they going to go? So it depends on the placement of the object. So first of all, like let's say we can see here at the top of the head, so the movement is more of like this. So for you to find out the path of action, it is essentially for you to just trace the movement of this one, and then that's essentially it. So it can be understood that the movement can be at a straight line. However, that's not really recommended. Whenever we're creating a movement, we always make it more so that it's a bit more curved. So our path of action should always mostly follow an arc, so it can be like this. But since we can see that the movement is a bit downward, we can also make the movement more of like this. The path of action might be different for different parts of the body. So like for example, for this one, there's not really a lot of curve, but for this one, the curve is more apparent and you can see that it moves a bit more downwards. For this one, it goes back up again. For this one, it goes down continuously towards where your chin is. So with that one, you can have a general path of action for the face. So probably it looks like this, but you should take into consideration as well the differences in terms of the paths of action. So you have your upper one, you have your bottom one, and you should always have a general one. So probably right around here. So for your general path of action, you mostly follow the movements of our two keyframes right here. However, there are some instances when you're going to create your character, it would be a bit more interesting if you exaggerate it a little bit. So probably, if you're going to see in a lot of head turns, you would probably see that the movement is a bit more drastic. So it has a bit more of a U shape. So for this one, I will try to demonstrate that one. So it's more of a U shape like this. And the U shape would also be like right around here. So it would go down drastically before it goes back up again. So that is for the head. The movement of your body right here. So it goes a bit more downwards. The movement of your left arm right here is that it kind of unravels itself and it moves towards the right side. So it kind of tucks more itself. The general body or the general torso also moves somewhat to the right. And also we have this one right here. So it kind of tucks itself even more. So, or rather, kind of goes outside a bit more. So you have this one right here. So there's a lot of path of action that you have to take into consideration. So depending on the path of action, it is recommended that you only tackle them one at a time. So for this one, it would be wiser for us to start off with the body first, and then afterwards the torso, and then afterwards the non-moving parts. So that's for our main layer. So the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to make this a bit lighter so that it's not as distracting. And then we're going to create our general movement for the head. So let's start off first with the head. So for this one, you can either create a less dramatic path of action by just creating a small curve. But for us, let's try it. Let's try to make it a bit more interesting by making it a bit lower. So for this one, another challenge that you might see is that your first keyframe right here, the character is facing towards the right. Your second character right here, it's also facing towards the right. So when you try to kind of in between that, you can't really find a proper in between. However, when you see a lot of head turns, they usually have the middle point as a front. So it would be also recommended that you try and find another, to have another view, and then afterwards you're going to turn into that other direction. So for this one, it would be recommended that we start off first by creating a front view going towards the right side. So with that one, it would be kind of better for me to find the length. So let's find the length right here, then right here, for me to kind of find the sizing, and then from then on, kind of create my basic shape. So whenever we're doing in-betweening, it is recommended that you start off with your basic shape, because if you just move on already to the final one, it would be a bit more taxing for you, because once you have a mistake um, in your animation and you've done a full render, it would be much more difficult for you to kind of change that one. So we have right here. So whenever I'm going to do my in-betweening for this, as you can see, I have my circle, which is the main basic shape. I have my basic shape for the head, which is my this trapezoid thing right here, and I also have one line. So let me just remove that. One line right here. So this one would kind of tell me what direction or what the center of the face is. So I can see that the center of the face is dead center. So we know that this is a front view. So whenever you're going to do a traditional in between, you might want to do something like this, so it's dead center. So for us, since we're going to make it a bit more interesting, we're going to move our head a bit lower. So probably lower right around here, so that it has a chance to kind of go up. So with this one, that's our head. And then from that point on, we're going to now create our other parts. So I'll be starting off with my A5 and then creating another keyframe towards the right. So in this case, let me just remove the main contact right here so that we can just focus on the preceding and then the next keyframe and the previous keyframe. So for this one, you're going to see that the middle is right around here. So it's kind of facing towards A3/4. So with this one, we're going to have to find a compromise. So what is the middle point? So we're going to find the middle point in terms of the height. So probably the circle would be right around here as well. So it would probably be around, sorry. With this one, it would be much better for us to just start off with pinpointing it. So the middle point in terms of the height right here. So we have right here the height for the chin right here, which is probably right around here. We also have the distance, which is between these two lines, which is probably around here. And then the distance between these two lines, which is right around here. Then from that point on, you can kind of clumsily create your basic shape. And then as well as the center point. So for the center point, this one is in the dead center. This is more of a 3/4, so we can kind of create the middle point with that one. So if you're going to find it, or we're going to remove this one, sorry, we're going to remove this one. This is the center. This is 3/4. We're going to find the middle point in that one, so which is right around here. And then from that point on, we can now create the other parts of the body, which is your jawline. So you have that one right here. So that's your general head. Now let's move on to another keyframe. So this is our A6. Now let's move on to our A7. So creating another one, opening my Lightbox so that I can find it. So same thing, going to find the general distance of these two lines. So probably right around here. This one is right here. This one is right here, and probably this one right about here. So as you can see, the spacing between the differences in the in-between is getting smaller and smaller. So you've seen the difference for A6, so there's quite a lot of difference. However, for A7, it's starting to become a little bit smaller. So later on when we're going to do our A8 and then our A9, it's going to be so much smaller to the point that it's almost invisible. And that's kind of normal for a slower in between like what we have right now. Then again, create our circle, our middle line, where the middle of the faces, and then the basic shape. Alright, so as you can see right here, around the lower part of the jawline right here, it's almost invisible. And for the others, it's very close. So that's for our A6. As I've stated, sorry, that's for our A7. So for E8 and E9, I'm going to speed right through them. So if you were to remember again, it's going to be very minute. So the process is still the same. Find the middlemost point and then kind of determine the middle point to circle and then everything else. Alright, so the difference right now is that there's almost no difference for our A8 in terms of our right side lower jaw right here. There's almost no there's a little bit of difference towards the chin. There's no difference on the left side lower jaw right here. And then for the circle, it's becoming more and more difficult to find the difference. For our A9, there's going to be almost no difference. So with this one, essentially you're kind of like copying. However, if you can kind of find a little bit more difference, then try to have it as much as possible. So probably around the head right here, there might be a bit more difference. So let's try and reflect that in our animation. Okay, so we have all of our basic shapes for the head. So as you can see, there's almost no difference for the A9 and the A10. So let's try and play it a little bit. So temporarily, I'll be placing the end right here, and temporarily, I'll be changing the frame rate to 12 frames per second, so we can kind of have an idea of how it would look like when it is played in twos. Alright, so it's jumping a little bit, but you can kind of see not a lot of difference as you move towards from A5 to A9. But the difference between like your A10, A4, and then A5 is very huge to the point that you don't even actually see it. So yeah, we have that one for your basic shapes. So now let's move on to the other parts of the body. So we tend to just move with the basic shapes first, and then from that point on, we can now move to other parts of the body. So with this one, I'll try to open my onion skin a bit more and try to kind of just reflect that we have for the sixth one. So it's the fifth one. Then I'll be removing everything else so that we can see only A10, A4, and A5. All right. So for this one, if you kind of move everything else for the neck, for this one, as you can see, the movement of the neck is that there's not really a lot of movement for your torso. So we kind of have to reflect that one as well. So with this one, it kind of has the same general idea, wherein we're going to find the middlemost point for the neck and then everything else for the torso. So let's start off first with the neck. So we'll be finding the middlemost point right here. You can kind of find also the end of the neck right here. The end of the neck for this one is invisible, just to be expected. So in this point, I'm not really going to trace so much of the other parts because I know that these are the non-moving parts. So kind of drawing them at this point is kind of a waste of time, especially when you're trying to animate a lot of things. Making sure that you just leave this out when, especially when you're just tracing it out or just trying to get the feel of it, is a bit more efficient. So with that one, let's move on to the other parts. Again, I'll be adjusting my onion skinning so that the last keyframe or the next keyframe is the only thing that can be seen. Then again, essentially I'm just finding the middle for everything. So I'll just be doing that for quite a while. You might not hear any narration from me. If ever I need to, then I will be quite glad to do that. So okay. So I'm just done with animating for finding the in-between for my A6. So with this one, as you can see that the movement for the head is quite drastic. I have added a neck here. For my A5, I don't really have a neck, so you have to add one right here because it's quite visible. You might need some assistance from your A4 for you to be able to add the neck, but for now, yeah, so you might need the assistance for that one. Also, as you can see right here, if you're going to compare the ones that I've drawn for my A5 and for my A6, they're slightly becoming lesser and lesser. So actually, you don't really have to draw this one because they're almost quite identical. So as you will be seeing later and later, I would be drawing lesser and lesser. So because that's kind of an indication to me that those are non-moving anymore. So with that one, I don't really want to waste my time simply tracing that I don't need to trace. So with this one, I'll be moving to my A7, A8, and then A9. Okay, so I'm right now right here towards my A8. So at this point, I don't really have a lot to animate anymore. So this point, probably the only thing that I have to animate is the left arm over here. However, everything else doesn't really need to anymore. So with this one, probably we can already start with. Alright, so probably you can kind of see it towards the upper part of the torso, wherein the movement is that it's slightly moving towards the right side, which is what we're supposed to be actually seeing. And then also the movement right here for the right arm is that it's slowly moving towards the right. And for this one right here is that it should be slowly moving downwards for the left arm. Alright, so that's it. Now let's move on to the face. So at this point on, all of our basic shapes are essentially animated, or at least the moving ones. So now one thing that we also have to check in terms of the movement is, since this is quite heavy in terms of its facial expression, we also need to look into the facial expression of the character that we're creating. So let me just move it again. All right. So we have here our A5. So from the movement of our A5 to A9, A10, in terms of our facial expression, you can kind of see that the eyes are moving, um, are longer. You also have a longer face. You also have a more open mouth. So with this one, if you're going to look at it logically, of course, you're going to start off with the middlemost point. So probably in terms of the sizing, would be around this size. That's for the eyes, based on how the sizing is. But you don't really have to do that all of the time. So another thing that you might want to, you can do something like that. But another thing that you might want to do is to spice it up a little bit for your A5, kind of reset it. Because the motion between your A4 and A5 is quite it's quite extreme. So with that one, it might be easier as well for us to have a more extreme change in terms of the facial expression, and then gradually make that open again for the A10. So for this one, we can kind of infer that the movement between your A4 and then your A5 is a more drastic facial expression. So with this one, you probably might want to have a close eye for your character, so that it would kind of give that idea of speed. So the movement is so fast, the character's eyes can't really keep open. So probably you might want to do something like that. So we have the eyes right here. The character's eyes is closed. So how I'm drawing it is the eyes are like this. So the reason why it's like that, because we can also kind of infer that since the character is moving downwards, the character's head is also kind of also a bit more down. So if we were to change this one, probably we would also place the eyes a bit more downward compared to the normal facial expression, or the normal modeling rather. So for the mouth, as you can see, if you were to compare the spacing between here and the spacing right here, there's not really a lot of space from the mouth to the chin, which is kind of normal because if you kind of tilt down your head like this, you don't really see a lot of your chin. You mostly see your forehead, which is to be expected. So probably our facial expression, we can move on with that one. Now let's move on to the next part. So at this point, what we're going to do is that we're going to make it with a gradual opening. So you can come with you can kind of have two ways for this one. So you can immediately go on with like having a more open, or you can have it half open. So if you were to actually find the middle point of this logically, since this is a bit more open, this is extremely close, you're going to have more of a 3/4 of how open this eye is. So like let's say your normal eye is right around here, your bigger eye is right around here, you would kind of find the middle point in that one. However, probably you might want to also have a more half open approach. So probably you might want to do that as well. And also for my mouth, I can either have like an open mouth or a closed mouth. So with this one, you can kind of see how in betweening isn't necessarily strictly finding the middlemost part. So delaying a little bit of things, making sure that the other things are a bit more advanced. So with that one, that's the way on how you can kind of spice up a little bit of how you're going to do with your in between. So you can kind of see that there are a little bit of nuances that I've added. So the speed of how fast the movements are moving is different for every single facial expression. So for the nose, essentially, there's not really anything moving, apart that it's going upwards, which is kind of normal since the face is also moving upwards. Next one is the mouth. So the mouth is a bit faster with how it's being transitioned. So it immediately opens. Next one is your eyes, so it slowly becomes bigger. However, it's a bit slow. It's a bit faster compared to that of the eyebrow. So for your eyebrows, you can kind of see that it's still going up, even though that the eye has reached its maximum. Like let's say surprise. How surprised it looks like. So with that one, those are just some ways on how you can make it a bit more different. So if you would like to make them similar in terms of how they move, so all of them kind of move or they kind of become bigger, longer, move at the same time, that's also acceptable for this activity. So there's not really a lot of differences. However, as you mature as an animator, as an in-betweener, you'll find like tweaking some of these nuances makes your animation a bit better and a bit more personalized. And now let's move on towards the hair. So essentially the hair you don't really have to do a lot. So with this one, it's more of finding in terms of the perspective, especially for your A5 right here. And then making sure that they are moving normally until you move on towards your A10. All right. So with this one, you can still kind of see that the eyebrows are a bit more delayed. The movement of the hair after around your A7, it hasn't really changed that much, which is what it's supposed to happen. And then the torso doesn't really move a lot. So with this one, you can also kind of see a little bit more nuance. We're in, especially for character animation, we really tend to focus on the facial expression, especially that the facial expression is a big part in this head turn. Um, Probably in some instances, if you're going to do a more action type of animation or in betweening, you might want to focus on the movements of the joints more. So it really depends on the animation. That's also the reason why we have case studies on how you're going to do in betweening for thirds and later on, I mean, rather for favors and then later on for thirds. This is kind of the reason why you have a lot of different things to animate, and how you animate them is quite different every single time. So with this one, I'm going to go on ahead and do some little tweaks. And then at the same time, I would also be tracing the non-moving objects. So I'll be speed running this for a while. So get back to you when I'm done with it. So for this one last thing before we actually do the cleanup. So for this one, the motion between your A4 and your A5, to kind of give the addition or the effect of how fast it is, you might want to do a little bit more animation blur. So for you to be able to do that, it depends on whichever animation blur you would like to do. But for me, I'll be doing a combination of a speed line, so multiple types of speed lines. So since the direction is moving from this direction and then it's moving towards the right, I would also would like to reflect that. So I would probably start off by creating some speed lines. So something like this. The ones at the head are a bit longer, probably some right here. Then right here. Then I'll be adding some. I'll be making this a bit thicker, so it kind of has that idea, or it kind of looks like water droplets actually. Okay. So probably another thing that you might want to do is to add some action lines right around your A4. So probably you might want to add. Okay, so you have that one. And from this point on, you can now start with your cleanup. So for your cleanup, I'll be creating another layer. So for this one, since I'm essentially confident with how my animation is gone, what I'll essentially do is that I'll change with another color, then making this a bit lighter, then trace as necessary. So the only instruction that I would like for you to do for the cleanup is to make sure that it's consistent in terms of its darkness, in terms of its how you created it, and also the thickness. So whichever you would like, as long as it's consistent. Okay, so let's see how it looks like. Okay, so that's essentially how your head turn is supposed to look like. So obviously not every single head turn will look like this because I have added some nuances. You're also free to also add your own interpretations or what are the things that you would like to add. But generally, I would like to see how the torso moves quite similar as well as the movement of the head, albeit the movement can be quite different.